Hello, children of abiding love. I'm going to tell you the fourth part of the story of knowing Jesus in a new way, the stories of the season of Easter. Are you ready? I'll get the materials. So you'll probably remember, if you've heard part of this before, that on the first Sunday of knowing Jesus in a new way, the women went to the tomb. There were 3 Marys among others, and they saw that when they got there, the stone had been rolled away and it was empty. They could see nothing but the white cloth that had been on his body. And when they went to tell the others, Peter and John ran to the tomb and went inside together and could feel his presence in the absence. Jesus was gone. Mary Magdalene stayed, crying outside, and she heard a voice, "Woman, why are you crying?" And she thought he was the gardener, and she asked if he could tell her where they had taken him. And then he said her name, Mary, and she knew it was he. And she might have tried to move towards him, and he said, "Mary, you cannot hold me." And then he was gone. On the second Sunday of knowing Jesus in a new way, we remember how 2 of the disciples were walking toward Emmaus on the afternoon of the first Easter, walking and talking and probably wondering so much about all the things that had happened, the cross, the empty tomb, what it meant. And a stranger came and joined them, asked what they were talking about, and they couldn't believe he didn't know all that had happened. And they asked him, "Don't you know?" And he said, "You are foolish and slow of heart." And he asked them to listen. And he opened the scriptures to them as they walked along the road. And the miles passed quickly. And when they got to Emmaus, they asked him to stay, and he did. And at supper, the stranger took a piece of bread, gave thanks to God for it, broke it, and shared it with the 2. And that's when they knew who he was. But then he was gone. And they knew why their hearts had been burning as they listened to him along the way. And they went to tell the others that he had been known to them in the breaking of the bread. On the third Sunday of the season of Easter, we remember how one night in Jerusalem it was dark when all the disciples were in a room with the doors shut. They were afraid that the soldiers would come and take them as they had taken Jesus away. And a voice said, "Peace be with you." And when they looked, it was he. At first they thought it was a ghost, but then he talked with them, and he ate a piece of fish with them, and he opened the scriptures to them as he had on the road to Emmaus. And then he said, "Peace be with you" again, and was gone. Now Thomas had not been there that night, and when they told him the next day what had happened, he did not believe them. He had doubt in his bones that made him say, "I won't believe until I touch his wounds." They were all really struggling to have their minds be big enough to know Jesus in this new way. It was understandable he had doubt. But 8 days later, when they were again in a room with the doors shut, Thomas was there this time. And when Jesus came and said, "Peace be with you," he went straight up to Thomas and said, "Touch me." And Thomas fell down, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus looked at him a long time and said, "Do you believe because you have seen?" And he looked around the circle and said, "Blessed are they who have not seen and yet believe." So now, on the fourth Sunday of the season of Easter, we remember how the disciples went north to Galilee as Jesus told them. It was a long journey, about 80 miles. It took about 4 days to walk. Many of them were fishermen, so they went to the Sea of Galilee to rest. This was a place they had known as boys. They had fished there with their fathers. Suddenly Peter stood up and said, "I'm going fishing," and the rest went after him to prepare the boat. Soon they pushed the boat off into the lake, and the sail filled with wind. They fished all night long, but they caught nothing. Still, the sound and the smell of the lake was comforting to them. They were home. In the morning, the sky turned pink and then blue. They could make out the shore and someone standing by a fire. They could see smoke and the red glow of the charcoal burning. "Have you caught anything?" All they could say was no. "Throw your nets out onto the other side." What did they have to lose? They pulled in their empty nets and threw them out on the other side. They could feel the fish moving against the ropes as they held them. But John wasn't paying attention to the fish. He was looking at the figure moving on the shore. He said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Peter stood up. He jumped. He swam. He felt the sand beneath his feet and he waded ashore. The others turned the boat around. Their nets were so full that they couldn't pull them in, so they dragged them behind the boat. As they walked toward the fire, the stranger said, "Bring some fish." When they gathered around the fire, the stranger was no stranger. They all knew it was Jesus, but they were afraid to say anything. "Have some breakfast." There were fish cooking on the fire. He gave them bread and fish to eat. They talked as they ate. The fish and the bread tasted of home also. Then Jesus said to Peter, "Do you love me?" "Of course I do." "Feed my lambs." "Do you love me?" "Yes." "Tend my sheep." "Do you love me?" "You already know that I do." "Feed my sheep." Then Jesus talked to Peter about growing old and how in old age we need help. Sometimes people tell us what to do even when we don't want them to. Years later, they wondered if Jesus had been preparing Peter for how he was to die as an old man in Rome. Jesus turned and said, "Follow me." Was he talking to all of them? No. Peter got up and the two walked along the shoreline. Peter turned back and looked and saw John following and said, "What about this man? Will he die like the rest of us?" "It is not for you to know such things." Peter fell silent, and Jesus was gone. So this is the story of knowing Jesus in the new way, of knowing Jesus in the morning. And when we're in the classroom, we can look around and find things, other materials from so many other stories in the Bible that we can use to help us tell parts of this story even more. But here in my home, I found something that makes me think of this part of the story I want to share with you. It's a little lammy, and like a sheep. And it reminds me of how when Jesus asked Peter, "Do you love me?" He said, "Feed my sheep, tend my lambs." feed my sheep. And so, as Jesus is the good shepherd and we are the sheep, I really like this little lamb here, and reminds me of Jesus asking Peter to do that, or all of us to do that. So you can look around in your home if you find something that you would like to use to help tell more of this part of the story, and be thinking about that. As I thank you for being here and being part of the circle and listening, and I want to just send a little blessing that Jesus loves you, and so do I. May you and your families be well. Take care, and thank you for being here.